Fantastic. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining our session today, The Case for Trade Pubs, Rethinking Journalism Career Paths. While general news outlets tend to capture the broad headlines, it's really the specialized, indispensable work that trade publications do that informs the industries driving our global economy. My name is Isaac Taylor, and I have the distinct pleasure of moderating this discussion with four of the sharpest minds in our industry. Joining us today, we have Alejandra Carranza, a reporter for Supply Chain Dive. We have Marina Benitez, a reporter for the Financial Times Specialist. Trayvon Howard, a reporter covering workplace safety and health for Bloomberg Industry Group. And Vandana Sinha, a senior editor for the American City Business Journals. So thank you all for joining us today. Really appreciate you for being here. And I think a great place to get started if we could just start with a foundational question of how do you explain trade journalism to someone unfamiliar? And Vandana, I think with you having been on both sides of the table, being a reporter and editor, it would be great if you could kick us off today.
Yeah, sure. It's funny. It's definitely the two sides because I started off at American City Business Journals. Just a little quickly about us, we operate 45 different local businesses around the country. So each local business, our audience is our local business leaders. They just want to know all of our coverage around local business. They want to know what's happening in their backyards to be able to run their organizations better. So it's, CEOs and executives and business owners and things like that. But I started off as a reporter, moved into editing, and now I'm in the corporate editorial team where I help with recruiting for the organization. So when I talk to folks to try and bring them in now, my answer to that question is it's not very different. Like it's, you're reporting a story as you would any other way. Business reporting can feel very intimidating to folks. In particular, trade reporting can feel, trade pub reporting can feel kind of intimidating to folks if they're sort of entering it. But think of it as any beat you might start covering, for any pub across any sort of topical spectrum. You're just trying to be an expert in whatever beat that is. And for business, I mean, a lot of what we do is a lot of like sort of community journalism, really, because we're covering local business. We're very hyper local. So we're covering, sort of deals, transactions, events in our backyards. And so we just want you to learn how to maybe ask a couple more questions about where money is coming in and where money is going out and how much of it, at each sort of stage and, what that looks like, a little bit more of the dollar figure questions, but really depending on the trade pub, it doesn't have to be too different, than what you would do at sort of more mass media. You're using a lot of the same skills.
No, absolutely. And I think it just goes back to journalism 101, follow the money. And kind of on the back of that, how does that affect your relationship with your sources at all? And Trayvon, if you could speak to that as well, that would be fantastic.
Of course. So I work within Industry Group. I am under the Bloomberg Law umbrella. So a lot of the sources that I'm cultivating and reaching out to tend to be law firms and working with kind of legal professionals. And at first, it was one of those things, getting into it, it was really intimidating. But I think after a while, as you start to covering issues and you start covering regulations, you start to become an expert. So it's a lot of the times you'll come to these lawyers knowing the answers, but you need to know how it's going to impact them or how they view it impacting them. So cultivating it is, again, similar to any other publication, but it's a matter of getting over that initial hump of kind of imposter syndrome, when in reality, a regulation or a rule is confusing and we're all trying to figure it out. I think going into it with that understanding and that curiosity will help you to kind of break down those barriers.
I'm glad you brought that up as well, because I wanted to send this over to you, Marina, as well. Being younger and starting out fresh in the industry, specifically with a trade publication, how is that different than more of a general assignment news desk?
Yeah, Thank you for the question. So I did come from college straight into institutional finance reporting. I did not have a background in the industry. So at first, it really does seem like you're learning a completely new language. It's a completely new ecosystem. You're trying to understand not only like terminology, but also relationships between institutions, regulations, markets, consultants. There's the entire structure of the industry you're covering. And I would say, like, to be very honest, it takes between 6 months to around a year for you to feel really, truly comfortable on the beat. My beat is very specific. I cover institutional investors, specifically their investment strategy. So that's it's very nuanced to somebody who never been exposed to that kind of information before. So it does feel like a very, very steep learning curve. And that's what I tell everybody that's trying to get into these types of publications. If you start even early on or entry level, you do have to expect to learn a lot before you can actually start reporting the way you want to. It's a lot of research. But once you cross that threshold, your reporting becomes way more nuanced because you stop repeating information and start to actually understand what matters. So you end up understanding what trends are developing and really what questions to ask. But it does take time and patience.
No, of course, absolutely. And the readers for trade publications are often experts in the field. The way I like to describe it is they're usually people with skin in the game, the practitioners, so to speak. And Alejandra, if you could just speak to how does that affect your reporting process when the people that are reading your publication are often the experts in the fields, and those may actually be some of the people that you reach out to for sourcing.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. So, yeah, I think it can make it, when instances like this, you have to specialize in a beat for most of the part that I'm familiar with. For example, I work for Supply Chain Dive, but my beat is in ocean shipping, ocean freight. So I'm mostly talking to shippers. So maybe like a retailer, let's just say, for example, just throwing a random name out there, Nike, right? They're a shipper because they ship different wherever they produce their shoes, if they import or export the raw materials and all that stuff. So I think what makes it different is you have to be curious. You have to specialize in that beat. And like what it resonated a lot what Marina said, like you're not going to be reporting at the beginning how you want it to, right? It's going to take time to develop that expertise, and just not being afraid to ask questions and telling your sources like, hey, like I'm new to this, I don't know how this industry works, can you explain this and that. So I think that kind of differentiates it, just being open to asking those. You might think they're small questions, but it kind of builds on that foundation of your reporting.
Oh, for sure. And, especially with trade publications, particularly in the business world, data analysis plays a pretty big role. And just curious, what role does data analysis play in the modern trade reporter's job? And Vandana, if you could speak to that.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, are you talking about like audience metrics or data, like
data more so on the reporting side?
The reporting side, data sets that reporters might go out and find. I mean, I definitely think that's always been sort of a big part of how you're able to set stories apart. So, a lot of what you want to talk about is, whatever the news is, but you want to give some scale to it. You want to give some context to it. So data helps you do that. I mean, data helps sort of solidify what you're reporting on, or whatever the premise of your story is. Our reporters are always trying to go out and find, for bigger sort of enterprise stories that they're working on, they're always trying to find data sets that sort of illustrate whatever it is they're writing about, in their story, that, for print or web, it doesn't matter, but what is the data telling us, and what does it mean? What is it telling us for the future? So they're always, whatever their beats might be. So, our reporters are covering commercial real estate or residential real estate or housing, or even retail restaurants. There's so much available data out there, on different industries that, it absolutely is, sort of beholden on us as reporters and editors to find, what those points are to bolster or to give context to whatever it is that we're reporting. We're actually in ACBJ, we're sort of building out our research hub, our data and research hub. We sort of build these weekly industry lists of largest companies across different sectors and industries. And we're really building that out to try and, fill in even more data blanks that we can constantly incorporate into our reporting and find more data sets out there, either like publicly available, like federal, state, local, or just interesting data sets that, like, just finding them, through FOIAs or data analysis that we're doing ourselves to find the stories that haven't been told, and or give context to the stories that we are finding.
Right.
Yeah.
And following up on the topic of data, this may not be specific to trade journalism, but I think AI is something that has touched really every area of journalism, and just curious to know how you use it on a daily basis, or also, how is your newsroom using AI? What are some of the policies there?
Absolutely. I don't think you can ignore the sort of march of AI. We do not use it to generate any stories. Our reporters are writing all the stories anything that we produce on the website has been written by reporters or editors. But we are using it in sort of internal, as internal aids, for our staffers, so our reporters or editors. There are tools or dashboards internally that we might use to help us with, summarization, like, identifying or, pulling up, there's a new dashboard tool that we're sort of building where it's like, we can find agendas or meeting minutes or, sort of different areas that our reporters have to check every single day, or, a few times a day. Are there tools or dashboards that we can build to help them identify those, and find, sort of updates to things quicker. SEC filings, tools that help identify and pull SEC filings, or identify sort of differences in securities and exchange filings for publicly traded companies, things like that. So, we're using it for a lot of ways for our reporters to either find, assess, summarize information or data to sort of make their reporting process easier or more expansive. But we're not using it to actually like do any sort of writing per se. It's all sort of internal use, but you can't ignore it. I think
Right.
This will continue to evolve, and we'll keep trying to tap into it in all the ways that we possibly can to make us better journalists. But it's not going to replace us as journalists, because there's a lot that AI cannot do. The most important things that we're doing as journalists are building relationships, with sources, with our audience. Like we're finding stories through sourcing that AI can't do. It can't build the relationships with sources that we are. And we are trying to find, the second thing is we're trying to find stories that don't exist. Like, it's not, AI is mostly scraping existing content out there, but we're trying to find the story that hasn't been produced yet, right? That hasn't been written, that hasn't been covered, that hasn't been unearthed yet. So, it's not something that will ever sort of replace the best parts of what we do, but there are ways to use it to make us better, more efficient, journalists or reporters or editors.
Of course, absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned the relationship aspect of it as well, because I think in business journalism in general, relationship building it's so important, but especially for trade publications where the subject matter can be so in the weeds and so specific. And Trayvon, you mentioned earlier having to deal with a lot of lawyers and people who can really get in the weeds in terms of the legal aspect of what you cover. How do you go about building those relationships and really making sure that, I had a professor in college who said, it's not about who you know, it's about who knows you, and making sure that those people, when they think of something interesting, that you are their first call.
Yeah, of course. Before I answer that question, which is a great question, I was going to piggyback off of the last point. I know our newsroom, our leadership has been implementing like AI to use on like kind of quicker stories like press releases. So our stories will have like an automation for that on there as well. So it kind of frees up time for us reporters to do things like cultivate time with sources and really get scoops or really spend more time on a deeper dive type of story. So it really is helping make the processes of being a reporter more efficient and focus on more important things. To your point, Isaac, I think it's very important to one, go to different hearings, conferences, even something as simple as a congressional hearing can really make a difference where you can get FaceTime with a source that you oftentimes wouldn't have to or wouldn't have the opportunity to because they may be too busy. So I think the more they see you in different spaces for that beat, and for me, that would be workplace safety. It makes it where people are, oh wait, I know this reporter. I want to see if they know about what's going on. That happened to me last week, where a source that I had been using for stories for the past year and a half, where we've connected and we've talked and we've unpacked a lot of different things that have taken place. That when something in the workplace safety world happened that not a lot of people knew about, he kind of flagged it to me and was like, "Hey, are you hearing this?" And from there, I'm able to dive deeper into it. So I think it's a matter of just really being in spaces and places where people on your beat are at to really kind of cultivate that relationship.
Absolutely. And Marina and Alejandra, if you have anything to add there, please feel free to do so.
Yeah, definitely. I would say that building sources in trade publications is a little bit different than on regular beat reporting. I would say, not from personal experience, but from talking to a lot of journalists in the area, that the trade journalists, they know the audience. They understand that the audience understands the subject matter. So conversations are a little bit more substantive and detailed and more to the point as to where like general news reporting was. So you have to have that fine line of specific questions, which is a whole different area. And you're also building like long-term relationships because these industries are smaller and they're all interconnected. So over time, the sources, they kind of recognize you at the end. And if you consistently cover their space and understand the nuances of the industry, you kind of become known in the area. And a lot of these professionals are not really getting constantly calls from mainstream media. So trade reporters, they often become the primary journalists covering this sector more closely. That gives us more opportunity to also have more access to these people. I've built sources through LinkedIn, email, every sort of connection or tab that you would think would not work actually ends up working. So just getting yourself out there and knowing that these people are actually really interested in talking to people in their industry, as well as showcasing their own work to this industry by themselves.
And I do want to remind the audience, if you have any questions, please post those in the chat and we will make sure to get to those as well. And Marina, you mentioned earlier that you pretty much jumped headfirst into the trade world. And just curious, I think it would be good for the audience to know what were some of your, the biggest differences in what you expected or some of the challenges that you had to overcome when you started out.
Yes, of course. So when I first applied and I got the job, I had in my head that I had to study real hard before I started the job because it was such a new aspect to me and new information and a whole new industry that I got really scared that even on my first day it wouldn't be enough. But at the end of the day, my editor sat me down on the first day and was like, let me explain to you what an asset class is. Like really from the bottom up, like they know these people and managers and editors when they hire you for this entry-level positions, we open quite a lot in trade spaces and trade journalism spaces. They don't really expect you to have all this knowledge about the industry because most people don't. So you're expected to have a learning period or an adaptation period. And that's something I personally didn't know when I first joined. I really thought I was gonna have to do a lot more by myself, but there's a lot of support inside the newsroom itself when you start in these types of places. And it's also a smaller newsroom generally, a smaller team. People are really collaborating, so you don't really feel alone. Asking questions is really the most important thing. So that's when you first start, you feel kind of intimidated by everybody around, by all the years everybody worked. I have coworkers that have been in the same company and the same team for the past 10 years, and I was just new. So it's okay to not know and to be that entry level person and to be that really beginner and in the adaptation phase of it all. So it's again, I said it's a steep learning curve. It is, but it is possible and you're supported through it.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Add to that, just for someone on the other side with a couple more years, I completely agree with everything Marina just said, which is, you know, I tell folks coming out of or younger journalists or entry-level journalists all the time, there is no such thing as a stupid question. Please do not stop yourself from asking. If there's a voice in the back of your head that doesn't understand, or there's a term that was thrown out. I mean, to this day, there's stuff I have to ask about. You know, don't stop yourself from asking, because if you try and work around it or pretend to know or write it in a vague way in your story, your editor will catch it. Your reader will know it. Everyone will, you know, what will come out is you will be shown like that you don't know exactly what you're writing about. And these are specialized topics in a lot of cases for different pubs. Even within, when I started off as a reporter at ACBJ, I was covering biotech. And the last time I thought about bio was high school, you know, I had biology class, and there's a lot I wasn't paying attention to. So there was a lot of, you know, to sources, scientists, you know, who are working on, you know, gene-based therapies. It was a lot of, can you explain this to me like you would a third grader? You know, lean into what you don't know. It's okay to ask a question, and you can sort of, you know, ask it in a way. It's like, I know this sounds like a stupid question, but I just want to make sure I understand how exactly does this work? How did, you know, always ask the question, always, especially when you're getting specialized material. Always ask the question, because it will burn you in the end if you don't and you pretend to know. And your readers will respect your stories for being more informative and authoritative because you know what you're talking about.
And I had a very similar experience. I work with WSJ Pro, which is the premium subscription service within the Wall Street Journal, and we write for private equity, bankruptcy, venture capital, so some very specialized subject matters. And when I first started, I remember my first week asking someone sitting next to me, I keep seeing Series A, Series B, what does that mean? What's a GP? What's an LP? And everyone was very approachable and accessible and willing to help, but also kind of going back to something you mentioned earlier, Trayvon, with some of the sources being lawyers and asset managers. You'll find more often than not that they are very willing to explain things. A lot of times they like to hear themselves talk, and if you just are honest with them and, you know, don't try to pretend to know what they're talking about, just say, hey, I'm not familiar with that term, can you explain that to me? And 9 times out of 10 they are very happy to do so. Like I said, they like to hear themselves talk a lot. And also curious to know some of the stories or maybe some of the projects you've worked on that you're most proud of in your trade publication career. And Alejandra, if you have any particular story that's top of mind that really sticks out, we would love to hear about that as well.
Yeah, before I answer that one, again, I agree with what everyone said. And I also wanted to point out that when it comes to sources as well, I made the mistake of always looking at sources as a story. Like, okay, I need to talk to this source because I'm gonna get a story out of it. But my manager taught me, like, don't just look at a source as a story. Look at them also as like a learning opportunity. Reach out to people and say, hey, like, this is my reporting beat, and would you have a few minutes to explain to me this? So like, don't be afraid to, like everyone said, ask the questions or talk to people just to learn, just to build that reporting beat, that coverage knowledge. So yeah, I just wanted to add to that. And then to answer your question, I think there's several. A lot of executives, I feel like in my experience, a lot of top executives are not open to being for interviews, especially like earnings calls. Like if I'm looking through an earnings call and I'm like, hey, can you elaborate on this? They'll just be like, nope, that's all we're gonna say. They don't want to expand on it. But I think the few times that I've been able to get an executive, that's been super helpful. So like, for example, I recently did a story on Bob's Furniture, and their CEO, there's a chief operating officer. They're open to an interview. And then I think I forget what year it was, 2023, I think it was, or 2024, the East Coast, the port labor negotiations. I'm pretty proud of that reporting too, because I was able to build like a source relationship with one of the union groups. And then lastly, I did a big story with my manager on the changing, how the ports, the trends were changing during COVID. So how smaller ports and more inland ports gained more traction during COVID because of all the congestion at the ports. So I think that's one of the stories I would say I'm proud of. Was that your question, Isaac? I'm sorry.
Yeah, of course, of course. So how did you come up with that idea? Kind of walk us through your reporting process a bit.
Yeah, so we noticed, I think what helps a lot is like different reports from different trade groups, especially I think they're called real estate groups, like it's a CBRE, I might be butchering the name, CBRE, and then Cushman and Wakefield, and I know there's another major one, but like for that, I got the idea from that because they released a report, and then they were noticing how occupancy rates at different warehouses was changing, and then they also mentioned the port. So then I think to add to that is when you look at a report, and even though the report is mainly talking about, let's say, real estate, but then they mention a little bit about the port, and that's my coverage in ocean shipping, I was able to grasp that, get that nugget and expand further. So kind of don't overlook those reports that you think might have nothing to do with your reporting. You know, look into it, see how it's relevant, and then maybe you can get a nugget from there, and then set up an interview and expand on it further. So that's kind of how I came up with it.
Absolutely. And for any of the other panelists, would love to hear a little bit more about your process as well, from, story inception to the finished product that's published. We'd love if you could walk us through your writing process, your reporting process, or what are some of the, or especially if there's anything unique that you do throughout the process as well.
Most recently, a story that I think really speaks to my kind of process and how it kind of came about. It was really a deep dive investigation that I did. So I covered specifically the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, as well as the Mine Safety and Health Administration. That includes workplace safety broadly, but usually I'm following the two administrations. I think Marina mentioned it earlier, where it's like when you first start getting into the beat, it takes about 6 months to a year to kind of get comfortable and get your kind of grounding and foundation. So when I first met with the outgoing chief for OSHA, he had mentioned a particular problem with workers in the engineered stone fabrication industry. It was relatively novel, and it was an area that I was still new to the beat, so I was still trying to get my grounding, that I didn't even I didn't have the time to really be like, all right, I want to focus on this workplace safety issue broadly. But as I've gotten comfortable on the beat, two or so years later, that kind of came and I could circle back to it. And I was like, all right, this is an area that's kind of slowly growing. It's an area that I really want to explore. It's not really regulated as much necessarily as it maybe should be by kind of OSHA lawyers and worker safety. Is kind of like a weird gap it falls into. But because it's workplace safety broadly, it was an area that I thought was worth kind of pitching and pushing for in the newsroom. And over time, I was able to kind of convince my editors and stuff like that. And it evolved into a much bigger kind of investigative, kind of month-long pitch and story piece that I'm really proud of. But I say all that to say that it definitely comes after you really have gotten a solid foundation in whatever you're covering, because you don't want to kind of do something really big right off the bat necessarily if you don't understand the basics of what you're covering to begin with, because then you won't be able to kind of recognize where, oh, this is a gap. You won't recognize that gap until once you become comfortable, I would say.
Right. And again, I think it just goes back to being comfortable with the subject matter. But also, it's great that you were able to vouch for yourself and for the story as well. I know that, especially with younger reporters, sometimes they can be a little hesitant to really push for something if they're getting some pushback from their editors. So that was great to hear.
Yeah, of course.
Absolutely. And we are working on getting those the comments open. So please, if you have any questions, you can hold on to those. Please, if you're able to share, please do so. But I think there may be a technical issue, but we're working on getting that fixed and up and running. I also wanted to kind of switch the conversation to diversity as well. I know that, it can be somewhat difficult. There can be some challenges and obstacles with being a person of color in a newsroom, and wanted to delve into that a bit. And so, how can journalists of color enter this space? And what I mean by that is, obviously, there aren't many of us in business journalism, especially once you start getting a little bit more granular into trade publications as well. What can we do to really open the space up for more people who look like us? And for any of the panelists who would like to answer.
No, it's a good question. I mean, it's something that we're constantly trying to do all the time at ACBJ. Again, I mentioned in this role, I help a little bit with recruiting on the editorial side for our newsrooms. So since I've, because I'm a person of color and because I came up going through, for me, AAJA conferences, I know the value of being in those rooms and at those conferences. So since I started doing this, I've been getting tables, at NABJ, NAHJ, AAJ, making sure that if there's any organization where we can have a presence, we just came back from CEBU, which isn't purely, targeted to journalists of color per se, but we're trying to be in front of as many folks, organizations, J schools as possible to tell folks about us. I mean, I honestly think what happens a lot, generally speaking, is, I was like this when I came out of college. I wanted to work, I grew up in the DC area. I wanted to work for the Washington Post. We all think about the sort of the mainstream daily first, or the Metro Daily. It often, at least for me growing up, was the most prominent sort of, epitome of where a successful journalism career is. And I didn't realize there was this whole other career. And honestly, as long as, as much as we can just kind of keep repeating that to folks, there is this whole other career where you can be an expert, you can own the news, you can, like you guys have said, we can be the one, oftentimes the only one either covering an incredibly important piece of news to our readers or the one covering it from start to finish. We'll often have, because we cover local business, we'll often have been covering something on the ground, weeks, months, years before maybe the Metro Daily kind of swoops in, covers it, and then has to parachute back out to cover something else, which, is understandable. But we've been on the ground, covering that, and we'll keep covering it well after others leave, So, and we get into depth, we have more depth, we have more voices, we're closer to the sources, on a lot of this. And what that means is we build a loyal readership that sticks with us, even as, sort of a mass readership may leave the Metro dailies. I mean, a lot of what we're seeing in the industry right now, you're seeing less of. I mean, we're all hurting, as a journalism industry at the moment. I'm never going to minimize that. It's really awful to see what we're seeing in the journalism industry. But we're seeing less of that in the trade pub world because our readership needs us. We're giving information that you can't find anywhere else. Again, at a level of depth that you can't find anywhere else. And they need this for their careers and their businesses, their organizations. So, that level of loyalty and the readership makes us often more stable organizations to work for. I mean, I've worked at ACBJ for the last 20 years, and we've never had a mass layoff. We've never had mass buyouts. Like that kind of thing I started as a reporter thinking, oh, I'll be here for like a year or two, and then there was just never any reason to leave. There are ways to advance your career at trade pubs because they're smaller organizations. You have more of a chance to like get into an editing role or, move up, learn more skills. So like there's a lot of appeal in working in trade business journalism, and you get to do incredibly impactful stories. You get to talk to people. You get to do human-centric, big impact types of stories. So it's just, I think most people don't realize that career exists out there.
Yeah, and I see your question here, Natalia. I'll get to that in just a second. But Marina, I did want to come to you as well because Vandana, it sounds like a lot of what you mentioned has to do with awareness, and sometimes people of color are just not even aware that trade publications are a route they can take. And Marina, you, like I said earlier, you jumped in head first, really straight out of college. Can you tell us a little bit about really just how you were made aware of it, and did someone reach out to you? Did you go to a conference?
Yeah, definitely. So I was thinking a lot to piggyback a lot of what Vandana said. A lot of people are simply not exposed to trade journalism early enough. It's not an option in school, in journalism school. I went to J school. You hear about politics, culture, entertainment, general news, but very few specialized reportings like finance, healthcare, law, energy, pensions. People don't really think you can go straight to college from those places. When I tell, excuse me, when I tell people that I graduated with what I do, they always go like, wow, like how do you manage that? Like how much finance experience did you have? I'm like, not really. So it was a lot of luck, I would say. In my case, I was open to everything and anything when I came out of college. So even if it was finance or something that I had no knowledge or experience in, I did apply either way because just the opportunity to learn and be able to be in the industry independent of the beat you're covering is very important. But I would say that recruitment efforts through organizations like the NABJ and the NAHJ really matter because they can create this direct access and visibility to these colleges and college students and people that are going to J school that you don't really get anywhere else. And those are important. Career fairs are really important. I know big J schools do this journalism career fairs every year. Those initiatives, they are worth it. But I also wanted to point out that mentorship is also huge in this area. And trade journalism can feel really intimidating from the outside because of how technical and it is. And having editors and people in the newsrooms willing to train people from different backgrounds is extremely important. So it needs to come from the company itself.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. I 100% agree. And, kind of on the back of that as well, how can, because Vandana, you're mentioning this as well, that, no layoffs and all that time is really a rarity in the industry, unfortunately. How can being a specialist create more job security? Curious if Trayvon or Alejandro can weigh in on this.
Yeah, I would definitely piggyback off of that because we are providing something that oftentimes, like how I write a story is much different than a non-trade publication would write it. Like oftentimes I'm going into a regulation deeply, unpacking what it means, what's taking place, and how it will impact, employers, who in turn are working with the lawyers who are labor lawyers. And then they want to reach out to me to get better understanding or clarity, or we kind of talk. So it builds that kind of indispensable role that we play where, oh no, we are being looked at to get information that oftentimes other publications aren't either covering or don't know how to necessarily cover because it really requires a specialized knowledge to kind of unpack something so niche as a regulation or a law that's being passed and how it's going to impact a company, which then in turn impacts the lawyers and the work that they do, to kind of advice that they provide to their clients, but also the worker side as well, because I interact with a lot of labor unions as well, and they additionally want to unpack and understand how it's going to impact their members. So it really is a matter of kind of playing that indispensable role for all sides involved, because everybody just wants clarity at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
I think Trayvon explained that perfectly. So I wanted to build on what Vandana said about conferences. I want to emphasize how important these conferences are. I've come from a very non-traditional route in journalism. I did not go to journalism school. I went to an international, I got my degree in international business and logistics. From there, I was working in the industry. I was the professional in the industry that I report on now. So I worked in ocean shipping. I worked for a major ocean line. So then from there, I began going to school because I always wanted to do journalism. So then I'm like, you know what? Let me use my business skills and then I'll go to school and get what's lacking, the journalism skills. So that's what I did. I took evening classes, started doing journalism classes, and then from there on, I hit a bump. How could I get a job? I don't have experience. All my experience is working with the actual shipping companies. I don't have any experience in writing, reporting. The writing that I have experiences is in my writing classes in college, which is, you guys know it's completely different from journalism. So then this is where the conferences came into play. I attended several NAHJ conferences, and then that's what I feel so thankful for, that I was able to get my first internship with CNBC, and then from there CNBC went to Bloomberg, and then from Bloomberg I got my full-time job with Supply Chain Dive. So I really wanted to make sure I talked about that, because these conferences are so important. Go out there, talk to people, tell them what you're interested in, tell them what your experience is, and don't be afraid that if you have a non-traditional route to journalism, because it's possible. Like, people will see the value in your skills. So yeah, I just wanted to make sure that I talked about the conferences, because they're super helpful.
No, thank you so much for sharing that. I could not agree more. It's, the networking side of it is just so important that there's really just no way of getting around it. So thank you for sharing that experience. And I also want to remind the audience, please, if you have any questions, just send those in the chat and we'll make sure to get to those. We have one here from Natalia Martinez, who asks, how valuable are multilingual skills and international perspectives in trade journalism, especially as industries become more global? For any of the panelists who would like to answer. No, please go ahead, Marina.
I actually can answer this one because I got hired. One of the main reasons was because of the languages I spoke, and to be able to go into that industry and that area. So I cover institutional investors, specifically investment strategy. But last year, my publication, which is called Mandawire, started expanding Latin America. They needed somebody who could communicate to all these people. CIOs, family offices, asset managers, pensions. And what ends up happening in Latin America is that not everybody speaks English. A very small percentage of the population speaks English. So you really have to speak the languages to be able to connect to those people and bring that perspective. So I am able, for instance, to report in 3 languages, and that's what I do on my day-to-day basis. And it brings a different perspective, that's for sure, a different side. But it's very important as these businesses become global, and also asset managers become more interconnected and more interested in other sectors of the world. In finance, we're seeing a lot of interest in Latin America, but we're also seeing a lot of interest in Africa growing, and there's a lot of interest in Southeast Asia. And just being able to be around those conversations and those tables and be able to understand, I would believe is really, really important. And if you have that skill, and a lot of people that go to NAHJ conferences, they do speak Spanish. I would say if you have a second language, whatever it is, it's a great leverage anywhere. And it will be a great leverage in trade publications as well. Even if you don't think it is, because it's so specialized, there's always an opportunity for you to showcase that.
Right, and I would imagine that it also just triples the size of your source pool as well.
Definitely, yeah. It also confuses a lot of terms in your head, but it does work pretty well, yeah.
Absolutely. Does anyone else have something to say to Natalia's question?
I can briefly add that actually I have an instance where I'm reaching out to or speaking with a workers union for a story. And oftentimes what I find when I'm getting a worker's perspective, a lot of the workers that are impacted are usually migrant workers or undocumented workers. So there's kind of a challenge where I have to either find a translator or they have a translator. So if you know how to speak Spanish fluently, it makes it where you can directly just kind of talk to the source without needing that extra kind of layer. And I think it's always best if you can directly hear it too, because I think sometimes things get lost in translation. So if you can be the first line of communication, that's always great.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I can
Please go
see
ahead.
like the other end of the spectrum for some of the stuff that you guys are talking about, because we are so hyper local. One would think like there's less of a need, but honestly, I mean, if we're covering local business communities, you got to cover every aspect, every portion of the business community. So obviously many of our business owners, there could be immigrant business owners. There are a lot of high majority immigrant communities within the business community, or like a given city or region that we're in. So there are definitely some of our newsrooms or markets where it would be hugely helpful to have more folks who spoke different languages to be able to cover those communities accurately and authentically, and tell their stories, because that's all a part of what we have to do. We don't cover as much in the way of international or politics, at its base, but everything we might cover all of those issues as long as we can sort of put our local business lens on it. So there have been a lot of our newsrooms across the country and our different local business journals that have covered, for instance, the effects of the current Trump administration, but it's always putting a local business lens on it. Well, what's happening there? And again, a lot of that impact is on our immigrant community. So being able to speak in different languages to communicate more effectively would be great. So I think that could help along across the board, no matter what you're covering.
Thank you so much for the background information. Really appreciate that. We have another question here from Alex Kinney, and please continue to keep the questions coming. Very interesting. Alex asked, how do you measure reach and impact in trade journalism? By contrast, in something like political journalism, you can sometimes see legislative changes follow your reporting. So how do you measure your reach and impact in the trade world?
I would say, I think it depends on what you're covering. I can imagine if you're covering biotech or, I don't know, finance, the impact may look different, but I know in the legal space, it kind of mimics like what you mentioned with the political journalism, where it could lead to a legislative change, it could lead to a policy change, it could lead to lawmakers reconsidering something that's on the books currently. So I think within the legal space, it would probably be similar to the political journalism aspect.
I can say in my case, it has a lot to do with how many subscriptions one sells. That's basically how in a lot of trade pubs, it's very much a B2B system. So if we're doing a good job as reporters, we're going to have more people interested in reaching out to our content. And so that's how it's the amount of people who are willing to pay to access that content. It's growing, it's going down, what area of interest, and that's more of the metrics we use. That's why usually this trade publications, they also work very closely with sales teams to see in what direction some reporting must go, or if there's something they need, or if there's something that could be better, if there's something that clients are asking. They usually go through sales, and then they come to us. So yeah, that would be.
Right. That makes a lot of sense.
I was going to say there's almost no way. I mean, we are as considering how sort of creative our craft is. Like, there's so many ways we're measured nowadays. Like, in terms of how many folks are visiting our websites for how long, and which stories specifically they're clicking on, and which how many subscriptions are buying off of which stories, things like that. So you can definitely, like, one aspect is definitely the audience measurement. We can see what the impact is by one story of ours might get because of how many subscriptions that particular story spurred. We can even measure it to that level. But I agree that we can have still incredible community impact. On the other end, it's more like qualitative. For instance, our Denver Business Journal, did a whole series of reporting on, the city's, this sounds really arcane, but again, this is high impact on the city's like permitting process for businesses and developers, and how backwards it was, and how many, how difficult, it is to get through. It can take years for companies to get through the permitting process to be able to build something, to be able to grow something, whatever the case may be. And, because of their coverage, the city council, changed some of the requirements around their permitting for businesses. But it can also be very human-centric stories. Like we are telling, again, I think because being in the trade pub world, we're a lot closer to our readership, because our readers are our sources, who are, like it's a smaller community that you're dealing with than when you're at a mass market pub. So we're in the room a lot with our sources and our readers, where if we find out about, news where a reader can act on it, they can make a deal based on the news stories that we're writing. They can get in, early on a project because of the news stories that we're writing, because we're finding out from us what's happening. I mean, I can't tell you the number of like sort of deals or transactions or that have occurred because of things that we've reported out there, if that, or
No, right. That completely makes a lot of sense. And I do see that we are getting a few more questions here, and I definitely want to get to those as well. Michael Martinez asked, what conferences have been useful for your work and career?
I can say I just came back from the Milken Global Conference in Los Angeles, which happened last week, which was basically a huge conference about everything, but mostly focused on finance, technology, and advancements. And that was incredibly useful because you get to speak to people from all sorts of areas and not only the beat you're covering. Great for networking as well. I would say that any conference you go is good and very important and relevant for the job you're making. Even if it's just to talk, even if you don't write anything coming out of those conferences, you still made an appearance, you did some networking, you met some people. So I would say a lot of these conferences are very objective and niche because trade pubs cover very niche things. So I imagine Alejandra goes to the supply chain ones, which is completely different than the finance ones that I go. So you would end up going to conferences perhaps you would never ever heard of because it's very, very specific. So even if we mention all of them, it will be complicated to say, but I'll say like Milken was amazing, for instance, very finance and investment oriented, and all of the NAHJ, NABJ, AHJ conferences are also amazing to go. Those specifically for networking and recruitment objectives are definitely good. That's what I would say.
I 100% agree with all of that. I would add for business journalists, the Wharton School for Business Journalists, they have Wharton seminars for business journalists that they run maybe once a year. They really dig into, if you're ever covering public companies or even private companies, they have a really good session that's aimed towards sort of bringing journalists up to, understanding financial statements and financial concepts and economic concepts. And that was really helpful for me. Also, this early in my career, as I'm graduating college, it's still going on. It's called the Chips Quinn Scholars Program. It is specifically for, folks of color who want to be journalists. And they helped line me up with, they had like a retreat. It's run by the Freedom Forum in the DC metro area. But they had like a retreat where we all kind of got together and talked about journalism. We all, I believe they helped with like internship, like helping lining up my first internship. They helped with getting me to my first conference, which at that time was Unity, when Unity was still happening. And then from then on, the AAJ conferences for me personally. But Chips Quinn Scholars, like again, for young journalists entering their career, I would highly recommend it.
Yeah, I actually also attended the Wharton seminar. That was a great experience. But Trayvon, you had something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I was just only gonna add that the National Press Foundation, they also have a lot of great fellowships and opportunities for journalists of all kind of ages and career level experience. I recently did a fellowship with them last year, and it brought journalists from all across the country, and it was a great opportunity to kind of network and connect with others.
Absolutely. We have another question here from Adrian Garcia. Sometimes trade journalism is, and I completely agree with this, unfairly called boring. What excites you most about your current role, and do your parents understand what you do? For anyone who would like to answer.
I guess I'm sorry. You can go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So it is complicated because a lot of people would hear what I say and consider it boring, but I would say it's less about what you write about and more about what you do with it. And the fact that you're reporting and recording a video or recording a podcast or be able to share this information with people and actually be an active journalist on a newsroom, interviewing people, talking to sources, and doing everything that one would imagine a journalist would do is way more gratifying than the actual information or story you're writing. Because at the end of the day, like a reporter will be adaptable to be able to write about different things, and it's a lot about the skill set that you have independent of the beat you're writing about. So just being able to be your natural like reporter is already very exciting. And even in trade publications, you have the opportunities to do all of these things that people wouldn't get. Like I got to travel to Los Angeles last week because I was doing a conference for 3 days, or I got to record a video at the Financial Times studio because I managed to get a source down from Brazil to come to New York City, or I get to expand the publication's reach, which might sound boring, but there's so much nuance to it all that it doesn't really seem boring to one. It's very interesting. Now, do my parents understand what I do? As a journalist, I believe so, yes. Exactly what I cover, I do annoy them sometimes with the like, oh my God, I just landed this interview. He's the blah, 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 blah. And they go like, oh my God, congrats, even though perhaps they never heard of this person before. So, which is usually the case, but they understand I would say the structure of it. Not necessarily exactly what I'm writing about, but I do share my articles every now and then just to get, into the mood of things.
Absolutely. Anyone else?
Yeah, I was kind of laughing at the boring part because it's so interesting that during COVID, because I report on supply chains, suddenly everyone was writing about supply chains before they were being ignored. So I found that kind of funny. And yeah, I think I agree with everything that Marina said. And I just feel like you just enjoy what you write about, enjoy the process. And it's always, I think what I find it exciting is being able to talk to people. I like talking to people, learning a new perspective. And even though my beat could be, I have a fixed beat, if you want to say, I know what I'm reporting on, it's still different because I'm talking to different people. I'm getting, everyone has different insight or different ways to explain something. And then, yeah, it's similar to Marina too. I feel like my parents know what I do, but they don't understand the industry. Especially at the beginning when I started my transition from like being in the maritime industry versus reporting on the maritime industry, I got a lot of like, not backlash, but like my mom was like, what are you doing? Like, are you sure about this? Because I was going kind of like from a salary job to like internships, and internships, are not super well paid most of the time. So I was like, what are you doing? Are you crazy? Like, are you going through like some kind of crisis? Like, what are you doing? But I think as long as you know what you're doing, what the plan is, but yeah, I think my parents, for the most part, understand now, but yeah.
Right. Absolutely. And I do want to be mindful of everyone's time. I see we have just 2 more minutes here. So thank you all for the time. Really appreciate it. It was a great conversation. I definitely learned a lot. And yeah, please, if anyone is interested in trade journalism, I'm sure our panelists would be happy to speak to you one-on-one. I definitely would be. Please feel free to reach out to me as well. And I would say it is definitely rewarding, can be very difficult at times. The subject matter, as we all have said, can be very dense, very in the weeds. But once you do finally break through and you get that source to talk to you who was maybe a little hesitant, or you're able to find that one little nugget of information or data, it's definitely worth it. And like we also said, you can definitely see some immediate results when a company changes its policy or something along the lines of that. So again, thank you to our panelists, and we really appreciate you.